just as a way of an outline, we went through the introductions. I'll give a overview slide presentation of focusing mostly on 5G communication. And then Dr. Moebi will give his presentation on evolution of wireless communications and IoT connectivity. Industrial trends of IoT is presentation titled for Dr. Ding. And after that, Ono will give Philips Visible Light Communication presentation that he has prepared for you. Each one of these should be 10 to 15 minutes long, leaving plenty of room at the end, plenty of time to have a discussion and Q&A session so you can pose all the questions you may have to the panelists. I'll start with this quick overview. We're clearly at the bleeding edge of communication technology these days. We are just barely putting the finishing touches on the last versions of some of these technologies. We got LTE advanced, 4G, and we got Bluetooth low energy, 802.11 AD in 60 gigahertz and AH in sub-gigahertz range. These are barely known even in the community. NFC has been around, of course, a little bit, and so many more. And before you know it, they're talking about going into 5G and Bluetooth 5 and 802.11 AX and AY and Li-Fi. And so there's this great momentum going forward, and reminds me of the old days when we were trying to convince people to go to 3G even, from 2G communication. And everybody was asking, why do we need to do that? Or from 3G to 4G. Hey, 3G has already got enough capacity. Why do we need 4G? And then it wasn't until the applications that necessitated the kind of data throughput that we now are so used to came about that a vision for those jumps in technologies actually presented itself and the momentum started. And now we're at a cross point where we see the vision for the next decade emerging in terms of Internet of Things and having trillions of devices being connected, and they all want to talk to each other, and it's all data driven. And of course, we need even further capacity and throughput and latency improvements and power consumption improvements that can't possibly be handled and supported by the current technologies we have in place. And that's the impetus for going to these next generations. So I'm going to focus on 5G here, of course, among all of those. And this slide basically is trying to differentiate 5G or at least summarize how 5G is different from the previous generations in various aspects. From the services perspective, we had 2G only focusing on voice and later on short message services. In 3G, we still were worried about voice because we didn't have enough capacity to cover everybody's demands. We also added narrowband data. 4G focused mostly on mobile broadband data communication. 5G, though, we obviously are doing more mobile broadband, called enhanced mobile broadband. We're also thinking about massive machine type communication. Ultra reliability and low latency is key, and power consumption has to be high on everybody's agenda as well. From a channel perspective, we were very narrow in the old days, from 200 kilohertz during the GSM era to up to 5 megahertz in 5G, 20 megahertz in 4G, and we're talking about less than 1 gig in 5G. Spectrum also has widened. The spectrum of usage has grown from just less than 2 gigahertz to all the way to 100 gigahertz over the last decade. Radio access technologies, we only used to have one, whether it was GSM or GPRS, or if some of you remember IS-136 even. And I'm dating myself here. And then 3G was still similar, just one rack at a time. And 4G still, but it came coalesced around the LTE and 3GPP standard. But in 5G, we're talking about multiple racks at the same time, some new radios, as well as a plethora of new types of services and features. Access type used to be predominantly circuit switched for voice, a little bit of data, packet switch for data through GPRS back then, but it has evolved to mostly packet switch and all IP in 4G, and now we're talking about even improving on that with ICN. Network topology, mostly macro cells initially, but over the course of the last decade we've been adding microcells and small cells, and now we're talking about mobile edge computing even, and network slicing, things like that. So hopefully that gives you a glimpse of what 5G is going to bring in compared to all the other past generations. So 5G design could be approached in a number of ways, of course. You can do it the way we've been doing it so far, which is evolutionary. Extend whatever we have right now, which is LTE, LTE Advanced, and then just relentlessly add on to it with full backward compatibility. It has its own benefits from that perspective, obviously. But because of that legacy, you're limited to what you can do or how much you can add. Or you could just abandon everything and make it revolutionary and bring in brand new air interfaces and networks and do the best you can with the technology we have, yet lose backwards compatibility, which is not good for business. The 3GPP, should be 3GPP. 3GPP approach is a combination of these two. Initially is to be more evolutionary, and LTE Advanced Pro, or you want to call it 4.5G or pre-5G, there's a lot of terminology going around, but they're all referring to the fact that we're just adding on to what we had, keep it backwards compatible, and hope that you're gaining more from what you had in the last generation. But it also lays the groundwork for a revolutionary set of features for the long term, and those would mean that you have a new network topology and a new radio or set of radios that you can add to the system, and new transport channels and so forth. So when we say 5G, it's a very vague terminology, and it could mean anything from the pre-G or 4.5G all the way to what in the next decade will take over all of that and replace all of that in the future. So what are the 5G applications? You probably have seen a lot of these diagrams. Enhanced mobile broadband is a terminology thrown around a lot, which means you basically are having a much higher data rate, internet access with augmented reality and cloud storage and whatnot. Massive IoT or massive machine communication, sensor networks, smart homes, remote health monitoring, logistics tracking, and the applications, I'm sure will grow exponentially from here. Ultra reliable and low latency communications is another aspect of, or major aspect of the 5G applications, where you want to be able to support industrial automation, driverless cars, remote surgery, smart grids, which really depend on ultra reliable and ultra fast response in terms of communication. In 5G, you can imagine that you will not be limited to one type of network for a number of reasons. One is, as I said before, we have backwards compatibility that we want to keep, but at the same time, we want to have the freedom to explode into the future without the strings attached to the past. So the network topology is going to be allowing you to have multi-layer networking, and each layer can be actually isolated from the others, or not even be there depending on the applications and deployments. And that's also good from a security perspective if you can limit the exposure to one layer and not the others. So you may have new radios and old radios and even non-3GPP type of radios, all part of the overall network. One of the key things that is always thought about and talked about as we are exploring the next generation of communication and networking is security. It's all, in the past, it used to be a side issue or an afterthought. Now it's front and center for obvious reasons. And there are many types or aspects of security that are being considered. Some of them are new even. Authentication, authorization, accounting, these are very understandable and been around. But availability is a new one that has been added. Confidentiality has obviously been there, but privacy, control of the data and who can see what from your private data is another area. Integrity has been around, but non-repudiation is another one that's been added. So you can expect to be the tracing and monitoring of where the data has been, who's seen it. So there's no denial of having received the data and so forth. So 5G security considerations, infrastructure security. So you want to make sure that the network trust models are adapting to distributed infrastructure and multi-stakeholder environment, where the networks are going to not necessarily be owned by one entity. So that's part of the model and has to be. Services security, so variable service level security requirements is needed. And availability and resilience is a key factor there. So the enablers for such an architecture would be, as I mentioned before, the network layers or slices, the new radios that we have, or we have thought of so far and potentially will be adding to in the future. Quality of service alignment and with the services that we offer. And opportunity for third-party network infrastructure providers to offer services. So those are the enablers of such framework. One of the things that doesn't get talked a lot about, at least not in such settings, and I thought it would be interesting to bring this up even among the academicians here, is the value and the importance of intellectual property in all of this. I'm sure everybody is aware and familiar with patents and owning rights to those and things like that, but how much does it actually matter in development of new technologies? It's usually an afterthought for researchers, but companies who deal with this or have to make a business out of this are very much aware of it, and we all have heard of the patent wars that have gone on in 4G, and if you thought that was ugly, wait till 5G comes around. So I thought it would be interesting to go through this exercise. For 4G, if you had a generic smartphone, not the one I'm showing here, but a generic smartphone, let's say at $400 retail price, the modem, the baseband processor that takes care of the cellular communication in there, is about $10 to $13 to cost for you to include into that device. The royalties you have to pay for all the ideas and patents that are included in there and people have rights to is costing roughly $60. So you could go and build a modem, and you can imagine how much work and effort and money goes into building a chip like that. And yet it's 1/6 of the value of all the ideas that people are claiming to have rights to. You go to 5G, same phone will probably have about $120 worth of royalties you have to pay for before you can actually sell that phone. And all the other components in there are about the same cost. So the royalties on the patents are as expensive and as the whole phone you have to develop. So you can imagine that companies are paying a lot of attention to those, and they want to be having their business not just focused on how to build it, but also have the rights to intellectual property in it. That's why you see a lot of debates in standards. Everybody wants to contribute to the standards where these things get settled into standard essential patents. And so by a quick look at the top 10 3GPP contributors for 5G, you can see that the main players of the industry are very much aware of the intellectual property value embedded into all these devices, and into that will be in 5G as well, whether it's device or service, it's all the same. And notice Huawei is the top player in terms of contributions, and extending that to mean by patents as well. And notice of the top 10, 6 of them, the red ones, are from Asia. I thought that was interesting. So, extending that idea a little bit further, I call that ultimate abstraction. Commoditization is the name of the game in my view. So you had chips and ICs and processors getting commoditized by hardware systems. A good example of that is IBM doing that back in the day, where being a chip design or a chip developing company was no longer the hot thing, but how you put the whole system together. Then that got commoditized by the software, so now you have all the hardware, but it's all the applications and the software and the OS and all that goes in there. The software got commoditized by the services. So, okay, you have software, you have hardware, but it's really the applications and the services that I have put on it that makes the most value for the business. So if you extend that, then commoditization to the idea level is the ultimate goal here, and services get commoditized by ideas and patents to some extent. I'm obviously simplifying the whole thing a little bit, but just to give the impression where things are going and why there is such a tremendous effort on the part of the player, the big players at least, and most players in the 5G as well as the other industries to have the patents, the intellectual property, and to protect them and even purchase them to make sure that they're supported well. And a lot of the players actually go vertical. They basically integrate vertically, and Apple is a good example of that. They have their hands into all of these components, but they haven't lost track of the most important one, which is the idea part at the top. I'd leave you with a couple of very interesting anecdotes. Everybody thinks Edison was the inventor of the light bulb. Well, he actually bought the rights to the first light bulb patent from Henry Woodward back 150 years ago. And a lot of you may know Hedy Lamarr, co-inventor of the frequency hopping spread spectrum. And she was a darling of the Hollywood as well. And she sold that to Bell Labs 75 years ago. With that, I will leave the discussion or presentation to Dr. Mahdi.